I signed the divorce papers in silence and immediately blocked my husband's access to every cent. That night, during his $350,000 wedding to his mistress, the music abruptly stopped. And when I walked in with a stranger, no one realized that a single sentence was about to destroy everything. But that moment didn't begin in the ballroom. It began much earlier, inside me. The mediation room felt unnaturally cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and forces your emotions to retreat inward. The air conditioner hummed loudly, almost aggressively, as if trying to drown out the tension hanging between us. A long mahogany table separated my husband and me, polished so perfectly it reflected the cracks neither of us wanted to acknowledge. He sat across from me in a tailored suit that cost more than some people's yearly salaries, relaxed, smug, victorious. He leaned back in his chair like a man who had already written the ending of the story and crowned himself the hero. I sat still, hands folded neatly in my lap, spine straight, face calm. Inside, something else was happening. "You're making the worst mistake of your life," he said. He walked out of the courthouse like a man reborn. I watched from the back seat as my ex-husband, still wearing the same victorious smile, paused on the steps, lifted his face to the sun, and inhaled deeply, as if freedom itself had a scent. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Because freedom, when built on lies, is nothing more than a beautifully wrapped trap. My driver asked softly if everything had gone well. I nodded, not because it had gone well, but because it had gone exactly as planned. As the car merged into traffic, I stared out the window at the city skyline. Atlanta stretched endlessly, steel and glass shimmering under the midday sun. He believed this city belonged to him, that his money, his title, his arrogance made him untouchable here. Once, I had believed that too. I remembered the early days, how carefully he had spoken, how respectfully he had addressed my parents, how convincingly he had played the role of a grateful man marrying into stability rather than entitlement. Back then, I thought humility was his nature. It wasn't. It was strategy. My tablet vibrated in my lap. A notification confirmed what I already knew. All secondary access linked to his profile had been successfully disabled. Cards, withdrawals, transfers. Every invisible thread he thought was his own had just been cut. I didn't rush to celebrate. Power doesn't announce itself, it waits. Across the city, he was already dialing the one number that had replaced mine months ago. I could picture it clearly, the grin, the excitement barely contained. "Vesper," he said, voice bright with triumph. "It's done." She must have squealed. I imagined her twirling, already spending money that no longer recognized his name. "She didn't ask for anything," he continued proudly. "Not a cent. The company, the assets, it's all untouched. All untouched." The irony would have been poetic if it weren't so devastating. By evening, they were on their way to a hotel so exclusive that weddings there were less about love and more about conquest. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, a venue chosen not for intimacy, but for spectacle. He wanted the world to see him winning. The manager greeted them warmly, flipping through glossy brochures. Vesper's eyes sparkled at every page, her fingers tracing prices most people never say out loud. "This one," she said finally, pointing to the most expensive package. "This is the wedding I deserve. $350,000. He didn't hesitate. Confidence is loud when it has never been tested. He placed the black card on the table like a crown. I imagined the exact moment the terminal beeped. Declined. A sound so small, yet powerful enough to shift the atmosphere. He laughed it off at first. Jokes, excuses. Another card, then another. Declined. Declined. The room must have felt tighter then, smaller. Vesper's smile fading just enough to notice. Finally, he wrote a check. Company funds. A risky move, but arrogance convinces you rules are optional. The manager nodded politely. Temporary confirmation granted. A false sense of relief settled over him. Meanwhile, my assistant received a call. "Let him proceed," I instructed calmly. "Accept everything. Cash nothing." Because traps work best when the door looks open. That night, while he slept beside a woman who loved the idea of his wealth more than the man himself, I sat alone in quiet luxury, staring at a city that finally felt like mine. Again. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Because tomorrow, his illusion would crack further, and each crack would bring him closer to the truth he had spent years ignoring. He believed the declined card was a glitch, but by morning, he would realize it was the first warning. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, not because I couldn't sleep, but because my mind was already moving faster than the city outside my window. There's a strange calm that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to save you. A quiet power, the kind that doesn't rush or panic or second guess. I made coffee slowly, watching the steam curl upward, thinking about how many mornings I had once spent waiting for him to wake up, waiting for his approval, his mood, his version of the day. I didn't wait anymore. Across town, he was waking up to a very different morning. I knew the pattern by heart. The way he reached for his phone first, checking messages, checking status, checking proof that he was still admired. I imagined him scrolling through congratulatory texts, basking in the echo of his own victory. Divorce finalized. New life ahead. No limits. Then came the first moment of doubt. Another declined notification. At first, he would have shrugged it off. A system delay. A security hold. That's what powerful men tell themselves when reality doesn't immediately obey them. He would have showered, dressed in his best clothes, put on that watch he loved, the one he claimed symbolized everything he had built on his own. He needed armor that morning. Vesper was already planning the day. I could hear her voice in my head, bright, demanding, impatient. Designer shoes, imported bags, a ring upgrade. She didn't want later. She wanted now. Celebration doesn't wait. They went shopping, not to ordinary stores, but to places where sales associates speak softly and prices are never questioned. The kind of boutiques where wealth is assumed, not proven. He walked in like he belonged there, shoulders back, confidence rehearsed. And for a few minutes, it worked. Vesper drifted from display to display, pointing, choosing, collecting. I'll take this. Add that too. Each word tightened something invisible around his chest. When the cashier reached the counter, the total appeared. An absurd number, spoken casually. He handed over another card. Declined. The clerk tried again. Declined. This time the silence was louder. He laughed too quickly, explained too much. Something about fraud protection. VIP restrictions. The clerk nodded politely, but the look in their eyes changed. People who work around real money can smell instability instantly. Vesper's smile thinned. What's going on? She asked, not quietly. He promised transfers. Claimed staff would handle it. Dropped his title like a shield. CEO, important, trusted. Eventually they were allowed to leave, with conditions. Debt disguised as privilege. By the time they stepped back onto the street, the mirror he had been admiring himself in for years was beginning to crack. Not shattered yet, just enough to let doubt seep through. That was when he finally opened his banking app. Frozen, no access, no explanation. Just a message telling him to contact the branch. I imagined the way his stomach dropped then. The way panic crept in despite his best efforts to suppress it. The way his voice changed when he called his mother, expecting rescue, and found judgment instead. I didn't feel joy hearing about it. I felt distance, because once you stop being emotionally entangled, someone else's chaos becomes background noise. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from my advisor. Phase 1 is complete, it read. He's destabilized. What's next? I stared out at the skyline again, fingers tightening slightly around my cup. Let him keep pretending I replied. The illusion needs time to collapse, because the most devastating moments don't come with explosions. They come when someone realizes, too late, that the ground beneath them has been gone for a long time. And soon, he would realize something else. The wedding he was so proud of? It was still happening. He thought losing access was the worst part, but the real humiliation was already being prepared. Quietly, patiently, and in public. There's a point in every unraveling where denial becomes exhausting. I could feel it in the way my phone stayed silent that morning. No frantic calls, no angry messages, no accusations yet. That told me everything. He wasn't ready to admit what was happening. Men like him don't confront loss head-on. They circle it, rename it, blame systems and people and timing. Anything but themselves. Across the city, he was still playing the role of the untouchable groom. Vesper, however, was beginning to notice the cracks. I knew her type well. Not cruel, just opportunistic. She loved certainty, admired power, and was deeply allergic to inconvenience. When wealth is your compass, even a slight delay feels like betrayal. She asked questions he couldn't answer. Why hadn't the transfers gone through? Why did the boutique need proof by afternoon? Why was his bank suddenly difficult? He smiled, reassured, promised, but promises sound different when they're built on air. By midday, the hotel manager had called him, polite, professional, firm. The check needed verification. Standard procedure, nothing personal, just business. That word, business, used to empower him. Now it cornered him. He called his finance department, expecting obedience, expecting solutions. Instead, he was met with confusion. Accounts inaccessible, tokens disabled, permissions revoked. For the first time, his voice rose, not in anger, but fear. Fix it, he snapped. I don't care how, they couldn't. And deep down, he knew why. I imagined the moment clarity brushed against him. Light, fleeting, unwelcome. The thought he pushed away immediately. She wouldn't dare. He still believed I was predictable, emotional, passive. That belief was his last comfort. Meanwhile, I met with Mr. Zephaniah in a quiet office, overlooking the river. He had known my father well, had watched empires rise and fall without ever raising his voice. He listened as I spoke, nodding slowly, understanding more than I said out loud. You're certain? He asked gently. Yes, I replied. Let it proceed. He didn't question me further. True power doesn't need permission. That evening, I stood in front of a mirror, adjusting a dress I hadn't worn in years. Not because it was expensive, but because it reminded me who I was before I learned to make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. Across town, Vesper was growing restless. She scrolled through wedding inspiration photos, surrounded by boxes she hadn't paid for, anxiety sharpening her tone. She wanted reassurance. Not love, not loyalty proof. And he couldn't give it. The first real argument erupted that night. Accusations disguised as concern. Doubt cloaked in sarcasm. When money falters, truth gets loud. Still, he clung to the idea that the wedding would fix everything. That once the event happened, status would stabilize. Applause would erase uncertainty. He didn't realize the wedding wasn't the solution. It was the stage. And when the lights finally went out, there would be nowhere left to hide. The closer the wedding day came, the more he sensed something was wrong. But by then, the trap was already locked. The day of the wedding arrived like a storm wrapped in sunlight. From the outside, it was perfect. Crystal chandeliers catching every gleam, flowers imported from distant continents, the soft hum of a string quartet weaving through the air. Guests arrived, dressed in silk and satin, unaware that beneath the glittering surface, a carefully constructed trap had been set. Inside the suite, he paced like a caged animal, rehearsing his victory speech, running through every detail as if preparation could armor him against reality. Vesper flitted around him, laughter spilling like champagne, blissfully unaware of the first cracks forming beneath their feet. She wanted extravagance, showmanship, proof of wealth, but the truth she had ignored until now was far more unforgiving. He reached for his wallet repeatedly that morning. Black card, platinum card, backup cards tucked into hidden compartments. Each attempt was met with the same cold refusal from every bank terminal, every digital check, every card reader. Declined, declined, declined. The words didn't scream at him, they whispered. But whispers become unbearable when repeated enough times. His chest tightened with a mixture of disbelief and panic. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Surely, this was a technical error. Maybe a glitch. But glitches don't stop working consistently across every platform. Glitches don't erase decades of assumed control overnight. Glitches don't leave a man in the room full of expectant guests with a rapidly melting facade. Vesper noticed. That was the first time I allowed myself a private smile. The way her eyes narrowed slightly, confusion battling entitlement, the first subtle crack in their alliance, the beginning of doubt creeping into their carefully curated bubble. He tried writing another check, holding it up as a testament to his authority. The hotel manager examined it politely, nodding with neutral professionalism. "Processing," he said. But he didn't know that I had already instructed them not to cash a single cent until the event itself. Every dollar he thought he owned was a mirage. Every move he made part of a stage I controlled. As they moved through the preparations, he began to sweat. Not from heat, not from nerves alone, but from the realization that control is an illusion. That for all his bluster, his dominance, and his assumed intelligence, someone else had quietly been orchestrating the real play behind the scenes. Meanwhile, I sat miles away, observing through my tablet, confirming that every restriction was active, every access denied, every step anticipated. It wasn't revenge for the sake of vengeance. It was a reclamation of power I had never lost, only temporarily restrained. And the best part? He had no idea, not yet, not even a whisper. The ballroom staff finalized the flower arrangements, double-checked the lighting, and polished the crystal glasses to perfection. Outside, the guests waited in glittering anticipation. Inside, my ex-husband was beginning to feel the weight of a day that should have been his crowning moment, but was already slipping through his fingers. And just before the first guests were announced, I sent the final confirmation. Every transfer frozen, every digital token blocked. His wealth, his freedom, his illusions, all intact in appearance, but entirely useless. He thought he was untouchable. And that was exactly the moment the storm would hit. He believed the wedding would cement his victory, but the truth was already waiting in silence, ready to explode at the perfect moment. By the time the guests began filing into the ballroom, the air was thick with expectation. Crystal chandeliers glittered like frozen constellations, and the polished marble floors reflected hundreds of carefully rehearsed smiles. Everything looked flawless, but perfection, as I had learned, is the most dangerous illusion of all. Across the room, he moved with his usual confidence, straightening his cufflinks, smoothing his tie, and practicing the charm that had carried him through boardrooms, negotiations, and, until recently, a marriage he thought he owned. Vesper clung to his arm, excitement painted across her face, completely unaware that the world beneath her feet had been quietly dismantled. The first sign of the unraveling came at the wine reception. He raised his glass to toast, the amber liquid catching the light. "To love, success, and freedom," he said, voice full of certainty. But when his card was required to finalize the last charges for the catering balance, the terminal refused, declined. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He laughed it off, forcing charm into the awkward pause. "System must be updating," he muttered to the manager, brushing imaginary dust from his hand. Vesper's smile faltered ever so slightly. He tried another card. Declined. Then another. Declined again. The room itself didn't notice. Yet. Guests sipped champagne, unaware of the tension building like an invisible storm around him. But Vesper did. She leaned closer, whispering questions that demanded answers he couldn't give. His usual silver tongue faltered, replaced by rushed explanations and nervous laughter. I imagined him stepping back, looking around at the meticulous event he had orchestrated, and feeling the first twinge of panic. Every smile around him, every nodding head of a guest, became a silent accusation. He was exposed, powerless behind a mask of opulence. Meanwhile, I was miles away, monitoring every account, every transaction. The controls I had put in place were absolute. Every asset he believed he owned, every card he had flaunted, was under my authority now. And I didn't need to intervene further. I just needed to wait. Patience would make his unraveling far more devastating than any confrontation ever could. As the orchestra began to play again, he forced a grin and guided Vesper to the dance floor. But the magic had gone. Each step he took felt heavier than the last. Every compliment he received, every admiring glance, was met with the gnawing awareness that something crucial was missing: control. And while he still thought this was merely a technical glitch, I knew the truth. The first crack had appeared in his gilded life. The cracks would widen until eventually there would be nothing left for him to hide behind. In the shadows of the ballroom, I could almost hear it. The quiet laughter of inevitability. The kind that doesn't shout. It waits. It watches. And it strikes precisely when you least expect it. He believed a few declined cards were mere mistakes, But the trap had already been sprung, and the real humiliation had only just begun. The ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, the string quartet playing a soft waltz that should have felt romantic. But for him, every note was a reminder that control was slipping. He smiled at the guests, laughed at jokes, and held Vesper close, but it was all performance. Confidence forced, charm rehearsed. Inside, the panic was growing like a slow-burning fire he couldn't see. Vesper twirled in her designer gown, her eyes sparkling, oblivious to the first tremors of reality. She had no idea that every luxurious detail she admired, every toast, every meticulously arranged centerpiece, was part of a story I was telling without ever stepping onto the dance floor. This was my stage too, quiet, unseen, but infinitely powerful. He reached for his phone mid-dance, expecting to check balances, authorize a last-minute request, make the invisible world bend to his will. But the app refused to load. Frozen. Every card, every account, every token of power, denied. He laughed nervously, forcing a lightness that didn't exist. Probably a glitch, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. But the silence around him, the eyes subtly narrowing, the way Vesper tilted her head in question, told him that the illusion was already cracking. He tried to salvage the moment, whispering sweet promises to Vesper, describing the purchases he would arrange later, the gifts he would procure after the celebrations. Her frown was the first visible warning, a tiny crease in the perfect facade, and with each promise, he revealed more of his desperation than he ever intended. Meanwhile, I monitored everything from miles away. Each decline, each failed authorization, each moment of forced composure was recorded in my mind like a symphony of justice. I didn't need to step into the ballroom. The walls of his arrogance were already collapsing. Then came the first public mistake. A florist approached him, holding a delicate arrangement of orchids meant for the ceremonial table. "Sir, the payment didn't process," she said politely. Just a small sentence, delivered quietly. But it landed like a hammer. Guests glanced at him. Vesper looked puzzled. He tried to laugh. He tried to reassure. He waved her hand in dismissal, muttering something about bank delays and system maintenance. But the cracks widened. Each attempt to cover his mistake only drew attention, only highlighted the growing reality he had tried so hard to avoid. The music swelled, and he spun Vesper across the dance floor, desperately clinging to normalcy. But the tension under his perfectly tailored suit was palpable. Every smile, every hand extended to a guest, every practiced glance across the room was now layered with fear he could not articulate. I sipped my tea quietly at home, feeling no joy, only calm satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. It wasn't malice. It was precision. And the beauty of it? He was still unaware, still thinking this was a temporary glitch, still imagining the world was on his side. By the end of the dance, I knew one thing. The performance couldn't last. Every move he made was leading him closer to the truth, closer to the moment where the facade would crumble completely. And when that happened, nothing he had built, money, status, pride, would protect him. He thought a smile and a few reassurances could hide the truth. But the walls were crumbling, and the storm I'd set in motion was about to reach him. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere in the hotel had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. Guests were still laughing, servers still glided across the polished floors, and the string quartet continued to play. But behind the glitter, attention had settled like smoke, invisible yet suffocating. He didn't notice it yet. Vesper, though, began to sense it, like a predator feeling a shift in the wind. He tried to maintain composure, straightening his tie, smiling at every guest, answering every toast with practiced charm. But his hands were betraying him now, slight tremors when he reached for the champagne flute, fingers brushing against the crystal rims a fraction too forcefully. Every movement seemed deliberate, forced. He was acting, not living. It started small. A card declined for the final bouquet, the florist's polite eyes questioning him. He tried another, then another, each one rejected. His voice faltered when explaining to Vesper. She tilted her head in subtle suspicion, noting the inconsistencies he tried desperately to mask. He was still unaware of the scope. Every account, every card, every access he thought was his own had been silently stripped away. The money he flaunted like a weapon now existed only in appearance. Each failed attempt to spend it chipped away at his confidence. By the time the wedding cake arrived, the first real panic was visible. Guests glanced curiously as the manager approached him discreetly, explaining that several payments were pending verification. He forced a laugh, tried to joke it off, but each word, each strained smile, only deepened the cracks. Vesper's expression hardened, irritation replacing excitement. "What's going on?" she whispered sharply, loud enough for him to hear. "I... It's just a temporary glitch," he said, voice trembling slightly despite his effort to sound confident. "The bank is, updating." "Updating?" she repeated, incredulous, a shadow of doubt creeping into her eyes. And that was when I knew the real work had begun. The trap I'd set months ago, executed patiently and silently, was unfolding perfectly. His arrogance had blinded him. His assumptions had played directly into my hands. The wedding, his crowning moment, was now the stage for his unraveling. From a distance, I watched the hotel manager process my instructions. Accept the check, let the event proceed, but don't cash it. Let him feel the illusion of control, the thrill of his so-called victory. Let him believe he was untouchable, while the reality he depended on silently vanished beneath him. Each small failure compounded the last. Each polite reminder from staff, each hesitant glance from Vesper, each card declined. It all became a crescendo building toward the moment he would finally understand the truth. By evening, as the guests raised their glasses in a grand toast, his smile was fraying at the edges. The performance was no longer seamless. He could feel the subtle vibrations of panic in his chest, though he couldn't yet name them. Meanwhile, I sat in my own quiet space, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, savoring the calm before the storm. Not with malice, but with patience. The storm had already begun, and it would hit with precision. He believed the night would crown his victory, but the first real humiliation was still waiting, ready to strike at the perfect moment. The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, the air heavy with perfume, laughter, and the faint hum of a string quartet. Everywhere he looked, guests smiled, applauded, and marveled at the perfection of the wedding he thought he had bought. Yet beneath the glittering surface, the cracks he had ignored were widening with every heartbeat. He had just excused himself to check one of the accounts he still clung to as his own. Fingers trembling slightly, he opened his banking app, expecting a reassuring green balance, a confirmation of his power. Instead, the screen flashed a single terrifying message. "Access revoked. Please contact administrator." He froze, eyes widening as the letters blurred into a silent scream. Vesper appeared behind him, noticing his sudden pallor. "What's wrong?" she asked, voice sharp, suspicious. "Nothing," he muttered, forcing a grin, but the lie hung in the air like smoke. He tapped and swiped, tried another card, then another. Each attempt was rejected, declined, blocked. Vesper's eyebrows shot up, her irritation sharp. "You promised," she said, her voice losing its earlier warmth. "You said this day would be perfect. Why isn't anything working?" Panic began to creep into his movements. He stammered explanations, glitches, bank updates, errors. But the certainty in his voice had dissolved. The room itself felt suddenly smaller, the chandeliers heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Meanwhile, I was watching from miles away, unseen, unheard, but every detail recorded. Every moment of his faltering composure was catalogued in my mind. This was the precision of patience, the way a plan executes flawlessly when those being manipulated cannot perceive it. The guests still smiled, still toasted, still assumed all was as it seemed, but the reality he had relied on was crumbling beneath him. Wealth, status, and control, all the things he had used to define himself, were now illusions. He tried to salvage it by offering explanations, promising transfers, pleading with managers, but each interaction only revealed more of his desperation. Vesper's patience thinned further, her excitement replaced by suspicion and frustration. She could feel the shift, even if she didn't yet understand its cause. Then came the moment that would humiliate him the most. A final card, his supposed ultimate symbol of wealth and authority, was inserted into a payment terminal for the wedding's last extravagant charge. Declined. A hush fell over him internally, Every joke he had told, every boast, every demonstration of power, it all evaporated in a single moment. The gilded cage of his arrogance had no escape, and he was beginning to realize it. Yet, he still didn't know who was responsible. He still thought it was chance, a glitch, bad luck. He couldn't see the hand that had quietly dismantled every thread of his confidence, leaving him exposed and powerless in front of everyone he had wanted to impress. And that was when the first guests began to notice his faltering, the tension in his shoulders, the forced smiles. The first whispers of doubt rippled through the ballroom, imperceptible yet inevitable. I leaned back in my chair at home, hands folded over my tea, and allowed a quiet smile. The trap was working perfectly. He was walking through a storm he could neither see nor control. He believed his power was absolute, but the night was far from over, and the final revelation was waiting, ready to shatter everything he thought he knew. By the time the first course was served, the tension in the ballroom was palpable, though most guests remained blissfully unaware. The orchestra played a soft interlude, but the music could not drown the subtle vibrations of panic radiating from him. He had tried to mask it with rehearsed smiles, with laughter and confident gestures, but the illusion had begun to crumble completely. Vesper noticed every falter, every twitch in his hand, every pause in his explanation, every forced laugh. She was no longer enchanted. Curiosity had turned into suspicion. "What is happening?" she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. Her voice carried just enough for him to feel the weight of accusation in the quiet elegance of the ballroom. He stammered. He tried to reassure. Promises spilled like broken champagne, empty and fizzing, failing to coat the truth. His wealth, his dominance, the power he had clung to, every card he had used, every check he had written, every transaction he had relied on, was now just paper and plastic. In his mind, the walls of his carefully constructed empire were collapsing brick by brick. And then came the final blow. The hotel manager approached him once more, holding the check he had written the day before for the extravagant $350,000 wedding package. The polite smile remained, but the words were precise. "Sir, the check will not be processed until further notice." He froze. The last thread of his confidence snapped in an instant. A flush of embarrassment colored his face, and his eyes darted nervously to Vesper, who finally understood, completely, that all the lavish spending she had been counting on was nothing more than illusion. Her gasp was quiet but sharp. The guests' smiles now seemed distant, almost accusatory. The walls of the ballroom, once magnificent and secure, now felt suffocating. He had become a man stripped bare in front of the very people he wanted to impress the most. I could almost see the internal collapse, the proud, arrogant man reduced to frantic whispers, desperate explanations, and futile gestures. He had spent his life believing control could be purchased, that loyalty could be bought, that status alone could shield him from consequence. But control, like respect, cannot be transferred. It must be earned. And he had squandered both long before this night. Meanwhile, I leaned back in my quiet office, a sense of calm settling over me. I hadn't needed confrontation, shouting, or exposure. The plan had executed flawlessly. Patience, precision, and observation. The storm I had set in motion had finally arrived, and it had found its mark. Outside, Atlanta's skyline glittered innocently, unaware of the quiet devastation inside the ballroom. I sipped my tea, savoring not triumph, but clarity. The knowledge that justice, when executed with patience and precision, is far more devastating than anger ever could be. And as he looked around, bewildered and exposed, I whispered quietly to myself, a soft, steady mantra of liberation. "You can take everything from me, except the strength I built for myself." He had thought he owned the night, the money, the people. But the truth had arrived quietly, leaving him powerless in the spotlight he once commanded. The night was alive with music and laughter, yet for him, it had become a cage of invisible chains. Every smile, every congratulatory handshake, every raised glass now felt like a judgment. He thought he had bought this moment, curated it, controlled it. But in truth, he was dancing on a stage I had designed. The subtle tension that had been building over days and weeks finally came to a head. The manager approached the microphone and cleared his throat politely, addressing the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady, "we are pleased to host this beautiful celebration. However, we have encountered a processing issue with one of the payments for today's event. Until it is resolved, some services will be temporarily suspended. A hush rippled through the guests. He tried to laugh it off, a high, nervous sound that didn't reach his eyes. Vesper's eyes widened. The realization hit her first. The glitter, the luxury, the spectacle she had been admiring, it was now teetering on the brink of collapse. He fumbled for an explanation. There must be some error. I'll handle it immediately. But the truth could not be brushed aside. And that was when I finally stepped into the light. Not literally, not physically, but through the invisible hand that had orchestrated every moment. A soft notification appeared on the manager's tablet. Proceed as instructed. Do not cash pay Mias until the day of the event. Access revoked for all accounts linked to Mr. Thier. The manager glanced at him politely, but with unshakable professionalism. His world, built on money and status, began to unravel in real time. He turned to Vesper, voice strained. It's a temporary issue. It's not permanent. Her expression hardened. Temporary? This has been going on all day. Every card, every check, everything. Her words trailed into stunned silence. And then, in that moment of confusion and embarrassment, the room's attention shifted. Whispers began, glances darted, and the first seeds of humiliation settled like frost over his carefully maintained facade. I could see it, the transformation in him from triumphant groom to desperate, flustered man. Every moment he had believed himself untouchable was stripped away quietly, deliberately, and finally. And yet, amidst the unfolding chaos, there was a strange beauty in the clarity of the truth. The life he had tried to dominate with arrogance and entitlement was revealed for what it really was. Fragile, hollow, dependent on the illusions he had crafted. I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Not vengeance, not malice. Just recognition of the power I had quietly reclaimed for myself. He had underestimated me, underestimated patience, underestimated quiet precision. And that underestimation had brought him here, to this moment of public reckoning. Outside, the city lights glimmered like stars, indifferent to human pride and folly. And inside, I felt the first real breath of liberation. The kind that comes not from revenge, but from finally reclaiming what was rightfully yours. He had believed he was untouchable, but tonight, the world would witness the unraveling of every carefully built illusion, and he wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The ballroom, once a palace of illusion, now felt like a stage set for exposure. The chandeliers sparkled, the flowers smelled impossibly sweet, and yet every step he took echoed like a drumbeat of impending reckoning. Guests whispered politely, curiosity tinged with unease, but none of them realized the depth of the storm unfolding in silence. He moved with forced grace, trying to salvage the night. Vesper clung to his arm, her excitement replaced by suspicion, and a quiet fear she couldn't yet name. Every card he had relied upon, every transaction he had flaunted, every carefully cultivated image of wealth and control, all had been stripped away without a single dramatic confrontation. The truth had arrived quietly, invisibly, and now it was blooming like wildfire. Then I appeared. Not in the way they expected, no dramatic walk into the ballroom, but through the subtle, unignorable evidence of my presence. The frozen accounts, the declined cards, the checks that couldn't be processed. Every luxury he had assumed was under his control had been rendered meaningless, and the message I sent to the manager confirmed it. This was deliberate, calculated, and unstoppable. He realized too late what had happened. The confidence he had carried for years, the belief that money and status could shield him from consequence, crumbled in an instant. His face flushed with embarrassment, hands shaking slightly as he fumbled for explanations that didn't exist. Vesper's eyes widened as understanding dawned. It's all gone? She whispered, incredulity mixing with the dawning fear that the man she had trusted to provide, to control, to protect, had nothing left to offer. He stammered, a high, nervous laugh escaping him. It's temporary. There must be an error. But everyone in the room could see it. His power, his carefully curated image, the empire he had tried to display with every gesture and smile, it was an illusion. He was exposed, vulnerable, human. For a long moment, the world felt suspended. The string quartet continued softly, oblivious to the quiet chaos, and I felt a strange calm. This wasn't triumph born of revenge. It was reclamation of the dignity, power, and control that had been mine all along. I stepped into my own light, metaphorically, not to gloat, but to reclaim presence. A single message sent quietly to the hotel staff confirmed that no further transactions could proceed until my conditions were met. The man who had underestimated me now had nothing left to rely on. His world, built on arrogance, had collapsed silently around him. And as he looked at me, really looked, for the first time in years, the realization hit him like a thunderclap. Every moment he had believed himself untouchable had been orchestrated by someone he had dismissed, underestimated, and taken for granted. I took a deep breath, feeling a release I hadn't known was possible. Not revenge, not cruelty, just the satisfaction of reclaiming myself, my power, and my life. Goodbye, I whispered softly, almost to myself, to a past that tried to define me. In that instant, the ballroom felt different, lighter. The illusion of control was gone, replaced by clarity. Every guest, every detail, every expectation mattered less than the quiet truth. I was free, unshakable, and fully in command of my life. He had thought he was untouchable, but the final curtain had fallen. And only then did he understand that the real power had never been his to take. The sun was beginning to rise over Atlanta, casting a golden glow through the grand windows of the ballroom. The night's chaos had faded into quiet whispers and scattered apologies. Guests were slowly leaving, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others laughing nervously at what they had just witnessed. But I remained still, standing at the edge of the room, feeling the weight of every moment finally settle into clarity. He sat at the edge of the empty dance floor, head hung low, the remnants of his false confidence scattered like confetti around him. Vesper, now fully aware of the depth of his deception and dependence, glanced at him with a mixture of pity and anger. Every gesture he had relied on to command respect and admiration was meaningless. Every card declined, every frozen account, every transaction denied. They had stripped away not just wealth, but the illusion of power he had clung to for years. And then I remembered the very first moment, the cinematic, almost surreal moment that had sparked all of this. The silence at the wedding, the sudden stillness, the faint hum of expectation as I stepped in with quiet determination. It had all led here. That night, I had signed the divorce papers and reclaimed not just my assets, but my sense of self-worth. I had blocked every financial lever he thought he controlled. I had waited, watched, and allowed patience to become the most powerful weapon. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. There was no anger in me, no malice, only the calm, unwavering certainty of someone who had endured, observed, and reclaimed her life. "It's over," I said softly, not to humiliate, not to punish, but to release. He understood then, not just intellectually, but viscerally, that control cannot be stolen, power cannot be faked, and arrogance cannot shield one from consequence. For the first time, he saw the truth. I had never been powerless. I had been patient, strategic, and resilient. And in that, I was free. Vesper, sensing the shift, pulled away. Her illusions of luxury and certainty shattered. She could no longer anchor herself in the wealth and bravado of a man who had been exposed. And as she left, so did the remnants of his control. I stepped outside into the soft morning air, the sun warming my face. For the first time in years, I breathed freely, without fear, without calculation. My past, painful, frustrating, silenced, was no longer a cage. Every step I took was my own. Every choice my own. I thought of all the moments I had felt small, silenced, overlooked. And now, standing here, fully present in my own strength, I realized the truth that had taken years to uncover. Resilience is born not from revenge, but from the courage to reclaim yourself. Power is not in wealth or status, but in clarity, patience, and unwavering self-worth. As the city came to life around me, I whispered quietly, a final affirmation to the universe and to myself. I am not defined by the past, nor by anyone else's illusion of power. I am the author of my own life, and my strength will never be taken from me again. The streets of Atlanta stretched before me, bright and infinite, each step forward a declaration of freedom, of resilience, and of the unshakable truth. I had survived. I had reclaimed, and I would thrive. On my own terms, forever. Did you enjoy this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm listening and sharing from your city, or just say here with you, and I'm so grateful for your sweet support. On the screen, you'll find two more incredible life stories that I highly recommend. You won't want to miss them. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe. I can't wait to share the next inspiring story with you. Sending love, respect, and gratitude until then.